The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty path to the barn as Zachariah Owens squinted against the rising light. At 32, he'd seen enough sunrises to know this one was special. It was his first as a married man on his own piece of land. His boots made familiar impressions in the dirt as he walked past the cabin window where his new wife, Bethany Rose Owens, sat working on her quilt, her slender fingers moving with practiced precision through colorful fabric. Their eyes met briefly through the glass, and he tipped his hat with a small smile before continuing to the barn, unaware that this morning ritual would become the steady heartbeat of their life together. It was 1876, in the Montana Territory, and Zachariah had finally claimed his piece of the American dream, 40 acres of promising land, with mountains framing the horizon like protective guardians. The cabin he'd built with his own hands stood as testament to his determination. Rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and straw, a stone chimney reaching skyward like a prayer. Inside, Bethany hummed softly as she worked the fabric beneath her needle, piecing together memories of a life left behind in Missouri. At 25, she had married Zachariah after a brief courtship, choosing the uncertainty of the frontier over the predictable future her father had planned for her back east. Her quilt frame sat positioned perfectly by the window, allowing her to watch for her husband's return while she worked. "These stitches need to be straighter," she murmured to herself, unpicking a section of blue cotton. "A proper wife makes proper stitches." The words echoed those of her mother, though Bethany wasn't certain anymore what constituted a proper wife out here, where survival demanded skills far beyond needlework. Zachariah returned at midday, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders with sweat from clearing a new field. "The south pasture's looking good," he announced, pouring water from the pitcher into a tin cup. "Another week and we can start planting." Bethany nodded, her eyes remaining on her work. "Mrs. Henderson from the trading post says we should expect rain soon. Good timing for your crops." "Our crops," he corrected gently. "This is our land, Beth. Everything here belongs to both of us." Her needle paused mid-stitch. In the 3 months since their wedding, Zachariah had consistently reminded her of this partnership, though she found it difficult to believe. No man she'd known before had considered a woman an equal stakeholder in anything beyond the kitchen garden. "I made stew," she said, changing the subject, "and there's bread cooling by the window." That evening, as they ate by lamplight, Bethany studied her husband's face. The angular jaw covered with a neatly trimmed beard, the crinkles forming at the corners of his deep blue eyes, the small scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood fall, these details had become familiar. Yet the man himself remained something of a mystery. "Tell me about your day," he said suddenly, catching her gaze. Bethany blinked in surprise. "My day? It was nothing special. I did the washing, tended the chickens, worked on my quilt." "The quilt's coming along nicely," he observed. "I see it every morning through the window. All those colors remind me of wildflowers." Her cheeks warmed at his attention to her work. "It's just scraps from old dresses and linens, nothing special." "Seems special to me," Zachariah said, breaking off a piece of bread. "Creating beauty from what others might throw away." That night, lying beside her husband in the darkness, Bethany realized he hadn't touched her beyond a chaste kiss since their wedding night. She wondered if her inexperience had disappointed him, or if the hard work of establishing their homestead had simply drained his desire. Either way, the distance between them in the bed felt wider than the physical inches separating their bodies. As dawn broke the following morning, Bethany watched through the window as Zachariah walked past again, his gaze briefly lingering on her at the quilt frame before continuing to the barn. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her, a partner, a burden, or something else entirely. Spring melted into summer, and their daily rhythm continued unchanged. Each morning, Zachariah would pass by the window where Bethany worked on her never-ending quilt, their eyes meeting in silent acknowledgement before he continued to his chores. The quilt grew larger, more intricate, becoming a tapestry of their separate lives running parallel but rarely intersecting. One sweltering afternoon in July, Zachariah returned to the cabin earlier than expected, his expression tense. "Riders coming," he said, reaching for the rifle above the door. Stay inside. Bethany's heart raced as she peered through the window. 3 men on horseback approached slowly, dust clouds rising behind them like warning signals. Owens, one called out as they neared. Zachariah Owens. Zachariah stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. That's me, what's your business? The lead rider, a weathered man with a gray mustache, removed his hat. Name's Marshall Tucker. These are my boys, Samuel and John. We're heading north to our claim and lost a wheel on our wagon about 5 miles back. Wondered if you might have tools we could borrow, maybe some help. Bethany watched the tension ease from her husband's shoulders as he lowered the rifle. I can do better than that. I've got a wagon. We can fetch yours and bring it here for repairs. Mighty kind of you, Tucker replied. Not many folks out here willing to help strangers. We're not strangers now that you've given your name, Zachariah said, gesturing toward the house. My wife can offer you water while I hitch the team. When the door opened, Bethany stepped back from the window, smoothing her apron nervously. The 3 men entered, hats in hands, nodding respectfully. Madam, Tucker said, appreciate your hospitality. Please sit down, she offered, moving to the water bucket. You must be thirsty after your journey. As she served the men water, Bethany noticed the youngest, John, glancing at her quilt frame with interest. That's mighty fine work, madam, he said. My mother was a quilter before her eyes got bad. Thank you, Bethany replied, pleased by his notice. It keeps my hands busy. And tells a story too, I'd wager, the older Tucker observed. Each piece has meaning, doesn't it? Bethany nodded, surprised by his insight. Yes, sir. The blue is from my wedding dress and the red calico was my mother's apron. Each piece carries memories. When Zachariah returned to announce the wagon was ready, he found his wife animatedly explaining her quilting techniques to the visitors, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Something unfamiliar twisted in his chest, not jealousy exactly, but a realization that this animated woman sharing her passion was a side of his wife he rarely saw. The men departed with Zachariah to retrieve their wagon, leaving Bethany alone with her thoughts and her quilt. She wondered if her husband had noticed her enthusiasm, if he might resent her easy conversation with strangers when their own exchanges remained so constrained. Hours later, Zachariah returned with the Tuckers and their repaired wagon. Bethany had prepared a hearty meal, stretching their provisions to accommodate the unexpected guests. As they ate, conversation flowed more freely than it ever had in the cabin before. How long have you two been married? Mrs. Tucker asked, passing the cornbread. 3 months, Zachariah answered. 4, Bethany corrected gently. It was 4 months last Tuesday. Zachariah looked at her with surprise. You're right, I lost track. Newlyweds, Tucker exclaimed. Margaret and I have been married 32 years come October. Isn't that right, Maggie? His wife nodded, a fond smile creasing her weathered face. Best decision I ever made, though I didn't always think so during those first lean years. Any advice for us? Zachariah asked, and Bethany stared at him, astonished by his request. Tucker chuckled. Talk to each other, really talk. Not just about the weather or the crops or who's going to milk the cow. Talk about your fears, your dreams. And touch, Margaret added softly. Even when you're bone tired, hold hands at the table, brush against each other when you pass. The land out here can be isolating. Don't let it isolate you from each other. Bethany felt heat rise to her cheeks and didn't dare look at Zachariah. The Tuckers' words had exposed the void at the center of their marriage with uncomfortable precision. That night, after their guests had departed with promises to stop by on their return journey, Bethany and Zachariah prepared for bed in their customary silence. But as they lay in the darkness, Zachariah's voice broke through the quiet. Why did you marry me, Beth? The question startled her. What do you mean? I mean, of all the men who came calling, why choose me? I'm not wealthy or particularly handsome. I asked you to leave everything you knew for this wild place. Why did you say yes? Bethany considered carefully before answering. You looked at me differently than the others. They saw a potential wife, someone to cook and clean and bear children. But you asked about my thoughts, my opinions. You listened when I spoke. She paused. Why did you ask for my hand? The darkness between them seemed to deepen as he considered his answer. Because when you smiled, I could see the future I wanted, a partnership built on respect and, eventually, love. Eventually, the word caught in her throat. I didn't expect you to love me right away, Beth. Love takes time to grow, like anything worthwhile. His hand found hers beneath the covers, warm and calloused. I hoped we would build something together, not just this homestead, but a life, a family. I still hope that. Bethany's fingers curled around his. I would like that too. The next morning, when Zachariah walked past the window, he stopped and tapped gently on the glass. Bethany looked up from her quilt, questioning. Beautiful, he mouthed, pointing to her work, then to her, before continuing to the barn. Summer progressed with punishing heat and infrequent rain. The crops struggled, and Zachariah worked from dawn until dusk trying to coax life from the resistant soil. Each day, he passed Bethany at her window, their brief exchange of glances becoming a touchstone in their increasingly difficult days. One evening, Zachariah returned to find the cabin empty. Panic seized him until he spotted Bethany through the rear window, kneeling in their small vegetable garden, desperately pouring precious water on wilting plants. "Beth," he called, rushing outside. "What are you doing? We need to conserve water." She looked up, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. "Everything's dying, Zachariah. The tomatoes, the beans, everything I planted. I've failed." He knelt beside her, taking the empty bucket from her hands. "No, you haven't failed. The land is harsh, and this summer has been brutal. Even experienced farmers are struggling. But we need these vegetables for winter," she insisted. "What will we eat? We'll manage," he assured her, helping her to her feet. "We'll trade, hunt, make do. That's what folks out here do." Inside, he washed the dirt from her hands with surprising tenderness. "Your hands are blistered," he observed, turning them over in his own. "So are yours," she replied, noticing the cracked skin and calluses that had formed over the past months. That night, they sat together on the porch, watching heat lightning flicker on the distant horizon. Bethany had brought her quilt work outside, her needle flashing in the fading light. "Why do you work on that quilt every day?" Zachariah asked suddenly, Bethany's hands stilled. "It gives me purpose, I suppose, something that's mine alone," she hesitated. "And each stitch is a kind of hope that we'll have a real home someday with proper furnishings and comfort. Isn't this a real home?" There was no accusation in his voice, only genuine curiosity. "It's becoming one," she admitted, "but it's not finished yet, neither are we." He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing the callus forming beneath her middle finger from holding the needle. "I like that. The idea that we're creating something together, stitch by stitch, day by day." The following week brought the first real break in the heat, along with an unexpected letter delivered by a passing mail carrier. Bethany recognized her father's handwriting immediately. "It's from home," she said, her fingers tracing the seal. "Your home is here now," Zachariah reminded her gently, "but I understand what you mean." She broke the seal with trembling hands and read silently, her expression shifting from anticipation to shock. "What is it?" Zachariah asked, alarmed by her sudden pallor. "My mother is ill consumption." "Father wants me to return home to care for her." She looked up, conflict evident in her eyes. "He sent money for the stage fare." Zachariah felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath him. "Will you go?" Bethany stared at the letter, then at her quilt frame by the window. "I don't know." "She's my mother, but—" She met his gaze directly. "You're my husband. This is my home now." "I would never keep you from your family," he said, though the words cost him dearly. "If you need to go, then go. Just—" He swallowed hard. "Just come back to me." That night, for the first time since their wedding night, Zachariah reached for Bethany in the darkness. Their lovemaking was tentative at first, then increasingly passionate as months of restrained desire found release. Afterward, Bethany lay with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I'll go," she whispered, "but I promise I'll return before the first snow. I'll be here," he vowed, "waiting for you, watching for you." 2 days later, Zachariah drove Bethany to the nearest stagecoach stop, a journey of nearly 6 hours. They spoke little, both aware of the impending separation weighing heavily between them. "Take this," Bethany said as the stage appeared on the horizon. She pressed a small square of fabric into his hand, a piece of her quilt blue calico with tiny white flowers. "So you'll remember me." "As if I could forget," he replied, tucking the fabric into his shirt pocket close to his heart. The stagecoach journey east was arduous, with Bethany crowded alongside strangers on hard wooden benches that seemed designed for discomfort. As miles stretched between her and Zachariah, she found herself fingering the gold band on her left hand, wondering if she'd made the right decision. What if her mother's illness lingered for months? What if Zachariah couldn't manage the homestead alone? What if, whispered a small, frightened voice inside her, he discovered he preferred life without her? When she finally reached her childhood home in Missouri, Bethany found conditions worse than she'd imagined. Her mother was bedridden, her once vibrant spirit diminished by the relentless disease consuming her lungs. Her father, never a demonstrative man, had aged a decade in the months since she'd left. "You shouldn't have come," her mother whispered during a brief moment of lucidity. "Your place is with your husband. My place is where I'm needed," Bethany insisted, wringing out a cloth to place on her mother's fevered brow. "Zachariah understands." But as days stretched into weeks and summer yielded to fall, Bethany found herself increasingly torn between filial duty and marital loyalty. Each night, she wrote letters to Zachariah, detailing her mother's condition and asking about the homestead. His replies came sporadically, carried by whatever travelers happened to be heading west. "The corn failed," he wrote in early September, "but the wheat survived. I've put up enough hay for the winter and traded labor with the Hendersons for preserved goods. The cabin feels empty without you." In October, first frost came early. "I've banked the cabin with earth for insulation and repaired the roof. Found a barn cat with kittens named the Mother Beth because she's stubborn and beautiful." By November, her mother's condition had deteriorated significantly. Bethany knew the end was near, just as she knew the mountain passes would soon close with snow, making her return journey impossible until spring. "You should go," her father said one evening as they sat by her mother's bedside. "She wouldn't want you stranded here, away from your husband." "I can't leave her," Bethany protested. "Not now. You can and you should," came her mother's weak voice from the bed. "I've made my peace. Don't sacrifice your marriage for a deathbed vigil." 3 days later, Sarah rose past peacefully in her sleep. After the funeral, Bethany's father pressed money into her hand. "For your journey home," he said, "and this is for you as well." He handed her a parcel wrapped in brown paper. Inside, Bethany found her mother's treasured fabric collection: silks, wools, and cottons gathered over decades, some so fine they were used only for special projects. "She wanted you to have these," her father explained, "for your quilt." The stagecoach heading west was even more crowded than the eastbound journey had been, filled with miners, merchants, and families seeking opportunity in the territories. Bethany clutched her precious bundle of fabrics, anxiety mounting as they encountered increasingly harsh weather. At a way station in Kansas, the driver delivered grim news. "Pass is closed ahead. Heavy snow came early this year. We'll have to hold here until it clears." "How long?" Bethany asked, dismay evident in her voice. The driver shrugged. "Days, maybe weeks. Nature doesn't run on a schedule, madam." Trapped at the rustic way station, Bethany withdrew her travel sewing kit and began working with her mother's fabrics. Without her quilt frame, she adopted the technique of English paper piecing, creating hexagonal flowers that could later be joined together. The other stranded travelers watched with interest as colorful patterns emerged from her skilled hands. "That's mighty pretty," observed an elderly woman traveling to visit her son in Colorado. "Makes me think of gardens back home." "It helps pass the time," Bethany explained, though in truth, each stitch was a step toward Zachariah, a tactile expression of her longing to return to him. Meanwhile, at the homestead, Zachariah faced the bitter Montana winter alone. Each morning, he still glanced at the window where Bethany's quilt frame stood empty, a habit he couldn't break. The cabin, never especially warm, felt particularly cold without her presence. When December arrived with no sign of Bethany, Zachariah rode to the Henderson place to inquire about travel conditions. "Passes are blocked solid," James Henderson confirmed, shaking his head. "No stage has come through in 3 weeks. If your Beth hasn't made it by now, she won't until spring thaw." She promised to be back before first snow, Zachariah said, unable to mask his disappointment. Henderson clapped him on the shoulder sympathetically. Promises are fine things, Owens, but weather and illness don't honor them. Your wife's likely safe somewhere east of the mountains, waiting just like you are. That night, alone in their bed, Zachariah held the small square of calico Bethany had given him, pressing it to his face to search for any lingering scent of her. Finding none, he carefully tucked it beneath his pillow and resigned himself to a long, solitary winter. Christmas came and went without celebration. New Year dawned cold and clear, with temperatures so low that water froze in the bucket beside the hearth. Zachariah kept busy with endless winter chores, chopping wood, tending livestock, repairing tools, but evenings stretched interminable and silent. One particularly bitter night in late January, as wind howled through gaps in the cabin walls, Zachariah found himself standing before Bethany's quilt frame. Impulsively, he lifted the partially completed work, running his fingers over the intricate stitches that connected disparate pieces into a harmonious whole. "Like us," he murmured, seeing suddenly what Bethany had been creating all along, not just a blanket, but a metaphor for their life together, pieces of separate histories joining to create something new and beautiful. At the way station in Kansas, Bethany had finished joining all her hexagonal flowers into a large center medallion when the stage driver brought welcome news. "Pass is clearing. We leave at first light." The remaining journey was grueling. Frigid temperatures, deep snowdrifts, and treacherous mountain roads slowed their progress to a crawl. By the time they reached the Montana territory, it was mid-February, and Bethany was exhausted, her hands raw from cold despite woolen gloves. The stage left her at Henderson's trading post, still 15 miles from the homestead. "No one's heading out that way," the driver apologized. "You'll have to wait for someone to come in." Mrs. Henderson welcomed Bethany warmly. "We've been worried about you, child. Your man's been checking every week for news." "Has he been well?" Bethany asked anxiously. "The homestead he's managing," Mrs. Henderson said carefully. "It's been a hard winter for everyone, especially those alone." 2 days later, James Henderson spotted Zachariah's wagon approaching through the snow. "Your man's coming," he called to Bethany, who had been helping his wife with inventory. Bethany rushed outside, not bothering with her coat, her heart pounding as she searched for Zachariah's familiar figure. When she spotted him on the wagon seat, thinner than she remembered, and with a beard grown wild, she couldn't contain herself. She ran through the snow, calling his name. Zachariah heard her voice before he saw her, a sound he'd dreamed of through the long winter nights. He pulled the wagon to an abrupt halt, scarcely believing his eyes as Bethany ran toward him, her hair flying loose from its pins, her face radiant despite the cold. "Beth." He jumped from the wagon, covering the distance between them in long strides, then swept her into his arms with such force that her feet left the ground. "You're here. You're really here." "I'm sorry," she sobbed against his neck. "The pass closed and Mother died and I couldn't get through." "SHH," he soothed, setting her down gently but keeping his arms locked around her. "You're here now. That's all that matters." The ride home was filled with overlapping stories as they tried to compress months of separation into hours. Bethany told him about her mother's passing, the gift of fabrics, the long delay at the way station. Zachariah described the failed crops, the harsh winter, the loneliness that had settled into the cabin like another presence. "I walked past your quilt frame every morning," he confessed. "Pretending you were still there, working at it, sounds foolish now." Bethany pressed his gloved hand between both of hers. "Not foolish. I worked on pieces of it every day while we were apart. It kept me connected to you, to our home." When they reached the homestead, Zachariah carried her across the threshold as he had on their wedding day, both of them laughing at the sentimentality of the gesture. Inside, Bethany was surprised to find the cabin neat and well organized, with a fire already burning in the hearth. "I rode out at dawn to start the fire," he explained, noting her expression. "Wanted it warm for you." That night, reunited in their bed, they rediscovered each other with newfound appreciation. The months apart had changed them both, hardened them in some ways, softened them in others. Bethany traced the new lines at the corners of Zachariah's eyes, the result of squinting against snow glare all winter. He noticed the roughness of her once smooth hands, testament to the care she'd given her dying mother. "I love you," he whispered, the words emerging naturally without premeditation. "I think I've loved you from the first moment I saw you at your father's house, but I know for certain now." Tears filled Bethany's eyes. "I love you too. I realized it when we were apart how empty my life felt without you, how constantly I thought of returning to you." In the morning, Zachariah walked past the window where Bethany had reinstalled her quilt frame. She looked up, catching his eye with a smile that warmed him more thoroughly than any fire could. But instead of continuing to the barn, he stopped, tapped on the glass, then came inside. "What are you doing?" she asked as he approached. "Changing the pattern," he replied, bending to kiss her. Some routines need breaking. Spring arrived gradually, the snow receding to reveal mud, then tentative green shoots pushing through the thawing earth. Bethany and Zachariah worked side by side preparing fields, repairing winter damage, and planning for a more prosperous season ahead. Each evening, Bethany returned to her quilt, incorporating her mother's fine fabrics into the expanding design. Sometimes, Zachariah sat with her, whittling or mending harnesses while they talked about their day, their plans, their dreams for the future. "What will you do with the quilt when it's finished?" he asked one night as she attached a particularly intricate border. Bethany paused, needle held aloft. "I'm not sure, perhaps save it for when we have a proper bedstead. Or a child," he suggested quietly. She met his gaze, hope and uncertainty mingling in her expression. "Do you think we will have children?" "I hope so," he replied, reaching to touch her cheek. "I'd like to see your stubborn chin on a daughter, or maybe your clever hands on a son." As summer approached, Bethany's suspicions were confirmed. She was with child, due sometime around Christmas. The news transformed the homestead, lending urgency to their preparations. Zachariah expanded the cabin, adding a small second room for the baby. Bethany preserved everything the garden produced, determined they wouldn't face scarcity during her confinement. The quilt progressed rapidly now, Bethany's fingers flying as if racing against her expanding waistline. By October, as her movements became more cumbersome, she finally declared it complete. "Come see," she called to Zachariah one evening as he returned from the fields. "It's finished." He entered the cabin to find the quilts spread across their bed, a riot of colors and patterns that somehow merged into perfect harmony. In the center, she had incorporated the piece of blue calico he'd carried over his heart during their separation. "It's magnificent," he breathed, taking in the thousands of precise stitches, each one a moment of Bethany's life, her thoughts, her devotion. "But why display it now? I thought you were saving it." Bethany smiled, rubbing her rounded belly. "It's not for display, it's for you. For me. All this time, I've been making it for our home, for some future perfect moment." She took his hand, placing it on the quilt's surface. "But I realized the perfect moment is now, us here together. The quilt belongs on our bed, where you can sleep beneath it every night, not just walk past it every morning." That night, for the first time, they slept beneath Bethany's creation, the weight and warmth of it enclosing them like an embrace. Zachariah ran his hand over the varied textures, marveling at how something made of fragments could feel so unified, so complete. "It's like us," he murmured, echoing his realization from that lonely winter night. Bethany nodded against his shoulder. Separate pieces joined with care, becoming stronger together than they ever were apart. In December, as the first heavy snow blanketed the land, Bethany gave birth to a healthy daughter they named Sarah, after her mother. The difficult delivery was eased by the presence of Margaret Tucker, who had kept her promise to visit on their return journey north and arrived just in time to serve as midwife. "She has your eyes," Zachariah marveled, cradling his tiny daughter beneath the colorful quilt that now served as both bedcover and cradle blanket. "And your spirit, I suspect." "God help you if that's true," Bethany laughed, exhausted but radiant. That winter, unlike the previous one, the cabin was filled with warmth and life. On the coldest nights, all three Owens slept beneath Bethany's quilt, the baby nestled between her parents, small hands clutching at the varied fabrics that told the story of her family's journey. Spring brought new challenges and joys as Zachariah and Bethany balanced the demands of their growing homestead with the needs of their infant daughter. The quilt, initially confined to their bed, gradually migrated throughout the cabin spread on the floor for the baby to play, draped over a chair when Bethany nursed, wrapped around Zachariah's shoulders when he came in from pre-dawn chores. "That quilt's getting more use than we ever imagined," he observed one evening as Bethany folded it after using it to cushion Sarah during her bath. "That's what it was made for," she replied. "Not to be precious, but to be useful, to comfort, to warm, to protect." As Sarah grew from infant to toddler, the homestead prospered as well. Good harvests and smart trading allowed Zachariah to purchase additional acreage. Bethany started a small business selling preserves and baked goods to travelers passing through the area. The original cabin expanded to include a proper kitchen, a covered porch, and eventually a second story with additional bedrooms. Through all these changes, the quilt remained central to their family life, repaired when necessary, washed carefully to preserve its colors, brought out for picnics, illnesses, and celebrations alike. When Sarah was 5, she declared it magic. "Why magic?" Zachariah asked, amused by his daughter's imagination. "Because it has pieces of everywhere Mama's been," the child explained seriously. "And when I'm under it, I can go to those places too." Bethany and Zachariah exchanged smiles over their daughter's head, both recognizing the truth in her childish observation. The quilt did indeed contain their history, joy, and sorrow, separation and reunion, the individual journeys that had brought them together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on their porch watching Sarah play with the newest addition to their family, 3-year-old Bethany leaned against her husband's shoulder. "Do you remember when you used to walk past the window every morning while I worked on my quilt?" she asked. Zachariah nodded, his arm tightening around her. "I used to wonder what you were thinking, sitting there so focused on your work." "I was thinking about the future," she admitted, "hoping we would grow together, become a true partnership. Wondering if you would ever love me as I was beginning to love you." "And now," she smiled, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, the quilt spread beneath them on the grass. "Now I know some questions answer themselves, given enough time and care. Like a quilt stitch by stitch, or a life," he added, "day by day." As darkness fell, they called the children inside. Zachariah lifted the quilt, now faded in places but still vibrant, still strong despite years of use. Together, they wrapped it around their family, creating a cocoon of shared warmth and history. That night, after the children were asleep, Bethany and Zachariah stood at their bedroom window, looking out at the homestead that had grown from wilderness to prosperity through their combined efforts. The moon silvered the fields they had planted together, illuminated the barn they had raised, touched the garden where food and flowers grew in equal measure. "I never walk past the window anymore," Zachariah observed, his arms encircling Bethany from behind. "No," she agreed, leaning back against his chest. "Now you stop and look, you see what's there." "I see you," he whispered against her hair, now streaked with subtle silver. "Always you." Later, beneath the quilt that had witnessed their journey from tentative strangers to devoted partners, Zachariah traced the scar on Bethany's palm, a reminder of her first difficult winter on the homestead, when she had cut herself chopping wood. "If I could go back and speak to myself on our wedding day," he mused, "I'd tell that nervous young man not to worry so much, not to hold back his feelings." "And what would you tell the young woman I was?" Bethany asked. Zachariah considered carefully before answering. "I'd tell her that the quilt she was making would become more beautiful and meaningful than she ever imagined, because life would add patterns and colors she couldn't foresee. Just as our life together has been richer, deeper, and more rewarding than I ever dared hope." Outside, a night wind rustled through cottonwoods they had planted the year after Sarah's birth. Inside, wrapped in the tangible evidence of their shared history, Bethany and Zachariah slept peacefully. secure in the knowledge that what they had built together, both the visible homestead and the invisible bonds between them, would endure, stitch by careful stitch, through whatever seasons lay ahead.